Hello, this is Morel with the continuation of the story, The Mysterious Island. The Mysterious Island. And the last words were that perhaps he will try to swim to land. Let us save him. Let us save him. And, by the way, please subscribe to the channel and please share the videos. Thank you very much. So let us proceed with the Mysterious Island. Those whom the hurricane had just thrown onto this coast were neither aeronauts by profession nor amateurs. They were prisoners of war, whose boldness had induced them to escape in this extraordinary manner. 100 times they had almost perished. 100 times they almost fallen from their torn balloon into the depths of the ocean. But heaven had reserved them for a strange destiny, and after having, on the 20th of March, escaped from Richmond, besieged by the troops of General Ulysses Grant, they found themselves 7,000 miles from the capital of Virginia, which was the principal stronghold of the South during the terrible War of Succession. Their aerial voyage had lasted 5 days. The curious circumstances which led to the escape of the prisoners were as follows. That same year, in the month of February, 1865, in one of the coups domain by which General Grant attempted, though in vain, to possess himself of Richmond, several of his officers fell into the power of the enemy and were detained in the town. One of the most distinguished was Captain Cyrus Harding. He was a native of Massachusetts, a first-class engineer to whom the government had confided during the war the direction of the railways, which were so important at that time. A true northerner, thin, bony, lean, about 45 years of age. His close-cut hair and his beard, of which he only kept a thick moustache, were already getting grey. He had one of those finely developed heads which appear made to be struck on a medal, piercing eyes, a serious mouth, the physiognomy of a clever man of the military school. He was one of those engineers who began by handling the hammer and pickaxe, like generals who first act as common soldiers. Besides mental power, he also possessed great manual dexterity. His muscles exhibited remarkable proofs of tenacity. A man of action as well as a man of thought, all he did was without effort to one of his vigorous and sanguine temperament. Learned, clear-headed, and practical, he fulfilled in all emergencies those 3 conditions which united ought to ensure human success: activity of mind and body, impetuous wishes, and powerful will. He might have taken for his motto that of William of Orange in the 17th century: I can undertake and preserve even without hope of success. Cyrus Harding was courage personified. He had been in all the battles of that war. After having begun as a volunteer at Illinois under Ulysses Grant, he fought at Paducah, Belmont, Pittsburgh Landing, at the Siege of Corinth, Port Gibson, Black River, Chattanooga, the Wilderness, on the Potomac, everywhere and valiantly, a soldier worthy of the general who said, I never count my dead. And hundreds of times Captain Harding had almost been among those who were not counted by the terrible grant, but in these combats, where he never spared himself, fortune favoured him, till the moment when he was wounded and taken prisoner on the field of battle near Richmond. At the same time, and on the same day, another important personage fell into the hands of the Southerners. This was no other than Gideon Spilett, a reporter for the New York Herald who had been ordered to follow the changes of the war in the midst of the Northern armies. Gideon Spilett was one of that race of indomitable English or American chronicles, like Stanley and others, who stopped at nothing to obtain exact information and transmit it to their journal in the shortest possible time. The newspapers of the Union, such as the New York Herald, are genuine powers, and their reporters are men to be reckoned with. Gideon Spilett ranked among the first of those reporters, a man of great merit, energetic, prompt and ready for anything, full of ideas. Having travelled over the whole world, soldier and artist, enthusiastic in counsel, resolute in action, caring neither for trouble, fatigue, nor danger, when in pursuit of information for himself first, and then for his journal. A perfect treasury of knowledge and all sorts of curious subjects, of the unpublished, of the unknown, and of the impossible. He was one of those intrepid observer who write under fire, reporting among bullets, and to whom every danger is welcome. He also had been in all the battles in the first rank, revolver in one hand, notebook in the other. Grape shot never made his pencil tremble. He did not fatigue the wires with incessant telegrams like those who speak when they have nothing to say, but each of his notes, short, decisive, and clear, threw itself light on some important point. Besides, he was not wanting in humour. It was he who, after the affair of the Black River, determined at any cost to keep his place at the wicket of the telegraph office, and after having announced to his journal the result of the battle, telegraphed for 2 hours the first chapters of the Bible. It cost the New York Herald $2,000, but the New York Herald published the first intelligence. Gideon Spilett was tall. He was rather more than 40 years of age. Light whiskers, bordering on red, surrounded his face. His eye was steady, lively, rapid in its changes. It was the eye of a man accustomed to take in at a glance all the details of a scene. Well built, he was inured to all climates like a bar of steel hardened in cold water. For 10 years, Gideon Spilett had been the reporter of the New York Herald, which he enriched by his letters and drawings, for he was as skillful in the use of the pencil as of the pen. When he was captured, he was in the act of making a description and sketch of the battle. The last words in his notebook were these: "A Southern rifleman has just taken aim at me, but..." The Southerner, notwithstanding Miss Gideon Spilett, who, with his usual fortune, came out of this affair without a scratch. Cyrus Harding and Gideon Spilett, who did not know each other except by reputation, had both been carried to Richmond. The engineer's wounds rapidly healed, and it was during his convalescence that he made acquaintance with the reporter. The two men then learned to appreciate each other. Soon their common aim had but one object, that of escaping, rejoining Grant's army, and fighting together in the ranks of the Federals. The two Americans had from the first determined to seize every chance, but although they were allowed to wander at liberty in the town, Richmond was so strictly guarded that escape appeared impossible. In the meanwhile, Captain Hardin was rejoined by a servant who was devoted to him in life and in death. This intrepid fellow was a Negro born on the engineer's estate of a slave father and mother, but to whom Cyrus, who was an abolitionist from conviction and heart, had long since given his freedom. The one slave, though free, would not leave his master. He would have died for him. He was a man about 30, vigorous, active, clever, intelligent, gentle, and calm, sometimes naive, always merry, obliging, and honest. His name was Nebuchadnezzar, but he only answered to the familiar abbreviation of Neb. When Neb heard that his master had been made prisoner, he left Massachusetts without hesitating an instant, arrived before Richmond, and by dint of stratagem and shrewdness, after having risked his life 20 times over, managed to penetrate into the besieged town. The pleasure of Hardin on seeing his servant and the joy of Neb at finding his master can scarcely be described. But though Neb had been able to make his way into Richmond, it was quite another thing to get out again. For the northern prisoners were very strictly watched. Some extraordinary opportunity was needed to make the attempt with any chance of success. And this opportunity not only did not present itself, but was very difficult to find. Meanwhile, Grant continued his energetic operations. The victory of Petersburg had been very dearly bought. His forces, united to those of Butler, had as yet been unsuccessful before Richmond, and nothing gave the prisoners any hope of a speedy deliverance. The reporter to whom his tedious captivity did not offer a single incident worthy of note could stand it no longer. His usually active mind was occupied with one sole thought: how he might get out of Richmond at any cost. Several times had he made the attempt, but was stopped by some insurmountable obstacle. However, the siege continued, and if the prisoners were anxious to escape and join Grant's army, certain of the besieged were no less anxious to join the Southern forces. Among them was one Jonathan Foster, a determined Southerner. The truth was that if the prisoners of the secessionists could not leave the town, neither could the secessionists themselves, while the Northern army invested it. The governor of Richmond for a long time had been unable to communicate with General Lee, and he very much wished to make known to him the situation of the town, so as to hasten the march to the army to their relief. Thus Jonathan Foster accordingly conceived the idea of rising in a balloon, so as to pass over the besieging lines and in that way reach the secession camp. The governor authorized the attempt. A balloon was manufactured and placed at the disposal of Foster, who was to be accompanied by 5 other persons. They were furnished with arms in case they might have to defend themselves when they alighted, and provisions in the event of their aerial voyage being prolonged. The departure of the balloon was fixed for 18th of March. It should be effected during the night, with a northwest wind of moderate force, and the aeronauts calculated that they would reach General Lee's camp in a few hours. But this northwest wind was not a simple breeze. From the 18th, it was evident that it was changing to a hurricane. The tempest soon became such that Forrester's departure was deferred, for it was impossible to risk the balloon and those whom it carried in the midst of the furious elements. The balloon, inflated on the great square of Richmond, was ready to depart on the first abatement of the wind. And, as may be supposed, the impatience among the besieged to see the storm moderate was very great. The 18th, the 19th of March passed without any alteration in the weather. There was even great difficulty in keeping the balloon fastened to the ground as the squalls dashed it furiously about. The night of the 19th passed, but the next morning the storm blew with redoubled force. The departure of the balloon was impossible. On that day, the engineer, Cyrus Harding, was accosted in one of the streets of Richmond by a person whom he did not in the least know. This was a sailor named Pencroft, a man of about 35 or 40 years of age, strongly built, very sunburnt, and possessed of a pair of bright, sparkling eyes and a remarkably good physiognomy. Pencroft was an American from the north who had sailed all the ocean over, and who had gone through every possible and almost impossible adventure that a being with 2 feet and no wings would encounter. It is needless to say that he was a bold, dashing fellow, ready to dare anything, and was astonished at nothing. Pencroft, at the beginning of the year, had gone to Richmond on business with a young boy of 15 from New Jersey, son of a former captain, an orphan, whom he loved as if he had been his own child. Not having been able to leave the town before the first operations of the siege, he found himself shut up, to his great disgust. But not accustomed to succumb to difficulties, he resolved to escape by some means or other. He knew the engineer officer by reputation. He knew with what impatience that determined man chafed under his restraint. On this day he did not therefore hesitate to accost him, saying, without circumlocution, "Have you had enough of Richmond, Captain?" The engineer looked fixedly at the man who spoke, and who added in a low voice, "Captain Harding, will you try to escape?" "When?" asked the engineer quickly, and it was evident that this question was uttered without consideration, for he had not yet examined the stranger who addressed him. But after having, with a penetrating eye, observed the open face of the sailor, he was convinced that he had before him an honest man. "Who are you?" he asked briefly. Pencroft made himself known. "Well," replied Harding, "and in what way do you propose to escape?" "By that lazy balloon, which is left there doing nothing, and which looks to me as if it was waiting on purpose for us." There was no necessity for the sailor to finish his sentence. The engineer understood him at once. He seized Pencroft by the arm and dragged him to his house. There the sailor developed his project, which was indeed extremely simple. They risked nothing but their lives in its execution. The hurricane was in all its violence, it is true, but so clever and daring an engineer as Cyrus Harding knew perfectly well how to manage a balloon. Had he himself been as well acquainted with the art of sailing in the air as he was with the navigation of a ship, Pencroff would not have hesitated to set out, of course taking his young friend Herbert with him. For accustomed to brave the fiercest tempests of the ocean, he was not to be hindered on account of the hurricane. Join me. Join me for the next video of the mysterious island. Join me, Morel Bernard, for the next video of the mysterious island. I look forward to seeing you then. Okay, all right. Next video.